Sorry about that. They they give us that light and illumination. Um, you think- no. Let me see something real quick. So this morning, I'm going to delve into the the first book of Genesis and Bereshit, which is the Parsha. So I'm going to try to do my best to break this down. The problem's going to be is it can be a little brain twisting, and you'll understand why. Because I want to deal with the first 14 uh, letters or words in Bereshit, and we're going to see what it's teaching us. Like I said, the exhaustive nature of the material is mind boggling. And as we've said before, it's a coded message within it. And hopefully, we can have some level of illumination at this point. So, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you have any questions, you can reserve them to the end. And then, once Sandy is kind of moderating, she'll bring people on board. You guys feel free to answer text and stuff, but I'm going to be really focused on getting the information out, so I probably won't have time to see the text themselves. So we'll start, and then we'll take and at some point we'll break off and end up Thursday morning completing the concept. The text of Bereshit, as I said before, the Bereshit is a very intimidating text. Now, anyone who has any idea what they're looking at, you'll realize that there's more to the text than what meets the eye. Now, there are purists, I guess, in other religions that might view Genesis as a myopic sort of lesson of history and time and about the way the world was created, and that's fine. But we want to take what the sages have taught us in the oral tradition that is written on paper and see what it does illuminate to us and show us. We're going to discover and uncover things that are going to be overwhelmingly profound and beyond words. And the problem when you try to deal with this text in its mystical form, we don't have words to explain it. And you'll understand what I'm talking about in a moment. But we're just going to get a peek into this. Now, the book of Genesis has 12 parshiot, those sections of parsha that we study every week. This is interesting because we also know that there are 12 tribes of Israel and 12 constellations in astrology. When God said, "Let us make man in our image," it is said that he is speaking with the angels, or he's speaking with the multitude that exists at the time. And the angels had put in charge of the physical world and was about to make man ruler over even the angels. In Psalm 8:4, you remember it says the angels didn't even like this and they responded to God. And it says, "What is man that you remember him? Like, why are you putting him on a pedestal?" Man will sin. What does God response according to oral tradition? God said to the angels, "If you were humans, would you would do worse." So the angels took him up on the challenge and failed as God had said they would. It said, "It is written that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and God would not let them return to Shemaim or to the heavens." And they were cast. Uzzah and Azael was cast to the far east and bound up. Actually, it says, according to oral tradition, the Erev Rav that we hear over and over ad nauseum actually emanates from these angels that fell. Now, I don't even begin to understand that. I'm just presenting the information, and we can have dialogue about this after. The first day, God creates light and separates light from darkness and day from night. Yet he didn't make light producing objects until the fourth day. This tells us what we're looking at is not a physical world as we know it. So remember, the first part of Bereshit is not speaking of a physical world yet, but it's talking about the process of coming to develop and bring the physical world into existence. This tells us that we're looking at something entirely different. The first day God creates light. This light we're talking about is not the sun. It's just the fact he didn't create the sun till later. Light is a primary manifestation of divine energy. Light is often used as a term metaphor for various manifestations and emanations of God. We talk about how God is light and that his light illuminates the world, that the light is the knowledge of God and the light was expressed in Torah. We could go through all kinds of understanding, but light in its general purposes for this particular part of the text is speaking of this divine manifestation of energy. Looking for a transcendent world in a vocabulary generated by our physical lives, we only can seize upon one word: light. We don't have a word to express this sort of ethereal, metaphorical thing that is out there called the essence and energy of God. God is not even a physical being, so we've decided to call it light because we have no other thing to call it. Light is our metaphor for the incorporeal, the spiritual, the divine. We speak of an era, for example, of enlightenment, which dispelled the dark ages. We've heard this period of enlightenment that started in Europe and France. And this, hopefully, the ignorance and penetrated this darkness and despair that was in Europe, and this divine light that bathes virtuous souls. It's supposed to be a light that brings us into a spiritual connection with God. Now, light itself straddles the defining line that runs between the physical and the spiritual. So when it says that he created light, or he brought out light, remember that this is an expression of divine essence. This light straddles is the defining line that runs between the physical world and the spiritual world. Having no weight, having no mass, having just about none of the matter's properties, light is the most ethereal of physical things. Now let me explain. Perceptibly real. This is what we perceive. Yet free of the qualities we ascribe to the objects of our perceptible universe. Follow me. Light serves as a bridge or allegory between a mind grounded in a material environment and the metaphysical abstraction it contemplates. Now I'm going to use an example to help you understand what I'm talking about. The idea of light helps us to understand what God meant when he said twice in Deuteronomy, the 4th chapter of Deuteronomy, he states in verse 35 and 39, you were shown to know the Lord your God. There is none else beside him. Know today, here's the second one, and take into your heart that the Lord is God, and in the heavens above, the earth below, there is none else. Now, we all can pretty much describe and understand what that is. There is none else. There means that there is none else. Indeed, they explain to maintain there are existence, and this is what most of humanity has done, to say, well, this means that since he says there's none else, there must be an existence of other gods. Have we heard that before? He's not saying that there isn't a God. He's saying there's no other God but him. Like he's numero uno. This is not what it's saying. We understand what it's talking about, that nothing exists outside of him. No illumination, no knowledge, no wisdom exists outside of God. And we're going to deal with this whole perception. This is a perception that we are outside of God and that the universe is outside of God. This is a this is going to be a mind blower in a moment. Now, ultimately, one is saying that there is more than one God ruling the world. Of course not. To say that there is a God with the power to create and destroy universe, punish the wicked, reward the righteous, causes galaxies to spin and crops to grow, but that there also exists a single thing not under his control, is to deny the existence of God himself. Now, the 14 words that I mentioned before in Bereshit, that speak of the worlds that were created and destroyed before our own is written. We've talked about this before, that there were other worlds or creations or manifestations of the existing worlds prior. I don't even begin to understand that. But here is what we have. It says that the world was unformed and void. Speaks of devastation, which was left by the primordial shattering of the vessels. That's mentioned in Kabbalah, that the shattering of the vessels, and I'm going to help you understand why it's so important for us to do tikkun and how much easier it is to do tikkun now than what it would have been before. This verse has 52 letters in it. It is a hint to the sacred name of God. There are 52 letters in holy and the sacred names. The numerical value of the expanded form of the holy name of God, Yud-He Vav-He, is spelled out in these 52 letters in the sacred names of God. One must deeply scrutinize with their soul in order to correct it from lacking and blemishes so as to receive the divine abundance. That means that as human beings, from the very beginning of time after the fall of Adam, mankind had to deeply scrutinize their soul in order to differentiate between what is perceived and what is real. And this will result in freedom from one's sort of egotistical nature and bring one to godly consciousness. That's the goal. We need to do this as our souls are damaged in the process known as the breaking of the vessel. Now, you'll understand this a little bit better in a minute. One needs to scrutinize their thoughts and speech and action so as not to break the vessel that you've been put into. Yes, we perceive our own existence and the existence of the myriad of objects and forces we call the universe. But this is our finite and subjective perception of reality. If we could observe reality from all the transcendent perceptions or perspective of the Creator himself, we would see the world devoid of selfhood and being. Meaning that you've heard the phrase that God concealed himself. You're going to understand why this concealment is important. If the eye were allowed to see the life and the spiritual content flowing from the utterance of God's mouth in every creation, we would not see the materiality, the grossness, and the tangibility of our creation, the temporal nature of our creation. For it would be utterly nullified in relationship to the divine life force. That means that if Hashem did not conceal himself, the world itself would fail to exist. If we could see it through the divineness of God, the world that we live, we recognize that that is our perception of the world. Have you heard that perception is what perception is truer than reality to some people? They perceive something, so it's therefore real. Like if somebody comes to you with a concern, I perceive this or that. Well, if they perceive it, it might as well be real. Well, we're finding out and we're understanding that God created this existence, and this is what we perceive. This is what we understand, but there's a whole nother element of understanding, and you've all begun to tap into it while studying Torah. Light exists. We regard light as an entity distinct from its emitter, distinguishing between luminous bodies and its luminous expression. An observer on Earth, for example, perceives both the sun and the light that extends from it. And hence, Our dictionary includes both the term sun and sunlight. But what would be the perspective of an observer? Say you or I could go into the sun. What would we perceive? Sunlight as an existence distinct from our sun? Well, obviously not. Light, by definition, has a source and its destination, an emitter and an observer. Light is information, a communication from one thing to another. Are you following me? The sun communicates what to us in the solar system? It communicates light, illumination, energy, sustenance, etc., etc., etc. Very much gives us the physical explanation of Hashem in the world. A communication from one thing or the light then exists only in relationship to to that which is outside of its source, but not in relationship to the source itself. If sunlight is defined as the sun's luminescent expression, then it cannot be said to exist within the sun. Light doesn't exist in the sun, where the very notion of expression is superfluous and meaningless, meaning that the sun in itself, the sun isn't light, but the sun expresses light. Does that make sense? Are you following? Now, does this mean that the entity that we call light begins outside of the sun? Again, the answer is obviously no. The sun itself is not dark. The luminescence that extends from it certainly pervades it. It is just the concept of light, of light has validity and meaning only to the observer who is outside of the source, who is not at the sun. Only the one observing it and feeling it can explain its light. Lacking sustenance and substance on its own, light exists only insofar as it serves as a function to carry information and effect from its emitter. Light then both exists and does not exist at the same time, depending on the context in which it is viewed. It goes from non-existence to existence, not by existence not by undergoing any intrinsic change, but simply by being observed from a different vantage point, a point in relation to which its function is significant. Our world is light admitted by God, an expression of his omnipotence, a revelation of his majesty. As light, the created reality has no substance on its own, no intrinsic being. Its existence is defined solely by its function to express and reveal its emitter. The revelation that we see in Genesis 1, where it says, "And God created light," it meant that he placed his wisdom, his expression into this physical realm that we call, or our perception of the physical realm that we call the world in creation. So the world exists only as an observed from without its creator and source. This is without God. We see a world just that's been created and has light. As it seems from the perspective, it does not merit the term existence. Again, not because it is any less there, but because the relationship of the divine or the sun, the definition function of sunlight of creation, is utterly insignificant. I have to shut my door. Stand by 1 second. The grandkids just came in. Okay, I'm back. The Bible twice reiterates the exclusivity of God's existence, twice in the same chapter, proclaiming that there is no other God other than he. For there are two paths by which man may come to appreciate the nature of reality, vis-a-vis the divine, from the top down or the bottom up. For example, the revelation at Sinai was a brief foretaste of a future world, a world in which all masked and superimposed perceptions will fall away. The world that came about through creation was a world created by God that also conceals God. A world in which our master shall no longer shroud himself. Your eyes shall behold your master. A world in which the world would be filled with the knowledge of God like the waters of the sea. Isaiah 30, verse 20 and 11:9. In the world of the Messiah, God will take the sun out of its sheath, it says, and obliterate the concealment that affects the perception of a reality outside of his. It says where God will be the light. We've heard this, right? We have the sun because we needed to perceive it in this physical world because we didn't have the capability of perceiving it at the highest level because of the fall of Adam and the fragmentation of all the soul of Adam into every human being. Here again, we're working on this light metaphor. And I hope by now you're kind of getting the idea, and I hope I haven't lost you. The first day, God creates light and separates light from darkness, and the day from night. Yet he didn't make the light producing objects. We've covered this. This tells us that we're looking at not a physical world on the first day of creation. Now, some would take, and look, I don't have the time to go into it, but let me just mention this. There is the hint that the world was there existence of other universes. Now, up till Judaism, I never would have considered that and never understood it. And now we understand that there are similarities between the structures of the paradigm in which this knowledge was contained, and our current model of such idea is both detail and number are truly astounding. This knowledge was recorded in Torah commentaries, in Kabbalah and in the Talmud. The Bible is literally a blueprint of the universe. All events and all these things are to be found in it. If we want to understand the essence of God, then it's got to be found within this blueprint. Do you remember when Moses was at Sinai and he asked Hashem to reveal himself so he could see him? Now, we all know that God has no body. He has no form. So what was Moshe wanting to observe or to see? He was wanting to have the veil pulled back so that he could see the true nature of Hashem. What were the first words out of the Holy One, blessed be He? He says, you see these Torahs? Take them, preserve them, give them to the children of Israel. He meant also the oral Torah. So in essence, what God is saying, if you want to have the cover peeled back, if you want to have your perceptions tuned into what is real, then know the Torah, know the oral Torah, and I will be seen, and all of creation will reveal itself. Its hidden mysteries will be opened up to you. Now, upon accepting these principles, that the entire universe is found within this blueprint, it is most obvious when flipping through the Bible that there is much more that lies beneath the surface. In addition to the oral Torah that was given at Sinai to Moses, and Moses handed down to the elders of Israel, the commentators of the Bible were the ancient elders of Judaism. The commentators were the mystic rabbis who went about their annotation in a very structured and set manner, which some might even call scientific. This oral commentary was received from their teacher, who turned and received this teaching down. And if you'll remember, Rabbi Wolbe has a sheet of paper, and if anybody has it, you might want to share it with someone. But a sheet of paper that shows the what do you call it, the concession, or what's the word for it? Help me here, guys.
Are you talking about where he goes generation to generation back? The succession?
Right, succession. Thank you very much, Sandy. Succession. The succession of of rabbis and teachers from Rabbi Wobe all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. It's mind-boggling. So it was an unbroken succession of teaching. This oral commentary they received from their teacher, who turned and received their teaching to their teacher, in unbroken period of time, all the way down to now. Every letter is explained on an individual basis in with the commentary. Every word is individually explained, and then explained in terms of the sentence or overall context in which they are to be found. The numerical value of the letters help to point out the correlations in the text, along with many other techniques found within Torah study. Commentary on the Bible is thus not the interpretation that most conceive it to be. It provides insight which exists in and of themselves, but which the layman is unable to catch on his own, lacking the knowledge and information which the commentators receive in the oral tradition. Having been made aware of these things, the layman is able to study the Bible on deeper levels with the aid of a good rabbi or a teacher that understands the access to all of the commentaries. Now, perhaps the most important fact, which is made clear from the start, the biblical year of 570 and et cetera, in which we find ourselves today, corresponds to everything that is current from the sixth day on. Everything existed prior to the sixth day is at another level far beyond our reality and understanding. It was only after Adam was created on the sixth day that we began the biblical calendar. So when someone feels a little tinge off by saying, well, I believe in the biblical calendar and that we're 6,000 years, et cetera, yes, but you have to realize that 6,000 years started at Adam's, at the sixth day. Perhaps the most important fact is this. Thus far, the universe itself that we're concerned about is an age of 6,000 years. That's what we're coming up on. Our calendar does not concern itself with these 6 days, as the ultimate purpose of the Bible goes far beyond this speculation. Now, the purpose of creation is a physical and practical one. Thus, our perception of time should concern that time which concerns us as human beings. Nevertheless, the first 6 days of creation obviously were as much of importance and in and of themselves. A distinguishment that is made between heaven and earth is to be found only in the literal translation, which acknowledges the world, or the Shemaim, as we understand, refers to the spiritual world. So this is talking about from Genesis 1 to the first day or the sixth day, is speaking of a spiritual level, a whole other universe that exists outside of our perceived reality. The Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah 29:1 also separates the two in examining the last three things which were created: the entire universe and the laws of nature, the nefesh, that is the soul of animals and humans possess the same, and then finally, at the very end of the 6 days, the neshama, the human soul. In Deuteronomy 32, verse 7, Moses ends his speech towards the children of Israel by saying that if you want to see the fingerprint of God in the universe, consider the days of old, the years of many generations. The Rambam, Nachmanides, explained that these verses refer to the distinct periods of time. The days of old refers to the first days of creation. Interesting. Whereas the years of many generations refer to everything that occurred succeeding Adam. It is evident then that there is something different about the seventh day of creation which separates it all from the sixth. And if you really want to further complicate things, we're going to talk about the eighth day. Remember the whole, and on the eighth day this existed, and on the eighth day this happened, circumcision on the eighth day. And we all know that after the millennial reign of Mashiach in the world and God as King of the universe, then we have an eighth period of time that no one even knows what it stands outside of time and space. Rav Levi said in the name of Rav Chama ben Hananiah that God created three objects on each day of creation. The first day, God created heaven, earth, and light. The second day, the firmament, Gehenna, and the angels. The third day, God created trees, herbs, and Gan Eden. And on the fourth day, the sun, moon, and the constellations. The fifth day, birds, fish, and Leviathan. We can get into Leviathan later on. On the sixth day, Adam and Eve and moving creatures. Rav Pinchas said that on the sixth day, six were created. Adam and Eve, creeping creatures, cattle, wild animals, and demons. The light of the first day was completed on the light of the first day was completed on the fourth day, with the objects that manifested light. The firmament, clouds, and the ocean on the second day was compiled on the fifth day. The observer over this idea of the Big Bang Theory recognizes time as a dimension. Being a dimension, time, or at least a perception of time, is thus relative to the system that one finds himself in due to the variances of gravity and velocity, etc., etc. A day on the planet may be equivalent to 10 years on another. I know that Dr. Gerald Schroeder espouses an idea in his explanation of the age of the universe, is that from the time of God expressing the universe into existence to today's period, the universe was expanding at extremely high rates from that beginning, and therefore a day is like, 6 million years or something like that. So you get an understanding that he, as a physicist, had a fantastic way of describing it, and you might want to consider pulling that video up to check it out. Let's go on. I'm going to go down a little bit. I want to stop right here because I want to get into more detailed information about the gematria and what the cosmologists have measured the age of the universe versus what Kabbalah says. It's quite interesting. So I'm going to carry that over till Thursday morning, and we're going to talk about the light that we're talking about is not from the sun. We're going to answer that question. The next is we're going to get into the details of this whole idea of the firmament and the heavens, et cetera, et cetera. How we find out that there's coded information that is in there talking about the components of photosynthesis and light and water and carbon dioxide corresponding to three basic components of creation. So it's going to be pretty interesting. So let me stop right here and take some questions or open up for discussion. Who would like to be first to open up? You can beat me up too, it doesn't matter. I've been abused before. Timothy?
Morning, thank you for that stimulating
And confusing?
class and information. It was great. That was awesome. Some of the things I'm trying to understand, not just from your class today, but just trying to understand always, is there was darkness, and then the light was created, and then it was separated from the darkness. So the light needed the darkness to receive it, kind of like you were saying when you're standing on the earth and looking at the sun, you see it coming, or you can understand more, how come it's
Right.
warm, cold. It's
Yeah, you can't appreciate sunlight
But I'm
unless
just
you've been
saying,
cold and in darkness.
in that same concept, that we needed to separate the darkness from the light, because with the light there was no darkness. When you turn the light on, the darkness disappears.
Right.
So, and then it seems to me like this is all a function, a
Right.
process that's necessary in order to sustain everything. Like you were saying, maybe something that's pretty above our rationality. And that's why the alphabet was so important, was not only to try to write out words that we could understand, trying to say it to somebody else, or to keep it for future generations so they could know.
Right.
It's also, they were like a picture to help us understand the function of each of the parts of creation, and how from the highest level down to the lowest level it works to
Right.
finally come to us. And then realizing that creation is continuously moving towards perfection,
Right.
how important that each of those pieces are working properly, are able to. And when I was able to start, grasping those kind of understandings from studying, that I can listen to you say what you just said and not think you're crazy.
Oh, thanks.
There was
Thank
a
God.
time when people started talking at a different level, and I was like, "Come on, man!" But the more you can understand it, and it's all in a way that man can understand it.
Correct.
The part about God we can't understand, but the part about the function of the creation in our realm, we can. And then there was just one more thing I wanted to say.
Yeah.
I listened to that about time moving so fast. So days were, one day could be 6 million years and stuff like that.
Right.
And they can even mathematically, do it. And it's very fascinating. But it always brings me back to what Maimonides said when he was criticizing Aristotle. He said Aristotle is probably right about everything in our universe, but he's completely wrong about what's above. And he said we must always leave room in our minds to accept how great and amazing the things that God could do. So that's an explanation we could grasp, but it could also be God so awesome he did it in 6 24-hour days. I'm not saying that I know there's more answers than not, but I'm just saying that's why I like Maimonides, because no matter what he said, whether it was, he would always leave room for that God could do anything. So when you're thinking about it, there's more than one way to try to understand it.
I totally agree with you. And obviously, we're not, put it this way, anybody that reads Genesis, the creation story, and just at face value takes it, you're going to receive wisdom. But to not realize that there are important questions to be asked about the text that is confounding, like he separated the light from darkness, but yet the sun hadn't been created, or the moon. Like, ask the question, what in the world does that mean? Now, I'm like you. I'm not concerned about timeline. 6,000 years, 6 trillion bajillion years, not material to me. Not material at all. What's material is that the master of the universe created this perception that we're in. Now, it's a real perception in the sense that what we touch and feel is real, but we develop perceptions out of that that are sometimes false. And those of us who are anchored in Torah are not going to be turned aside by wrong perceptions if we have true wisdom and illumination from God that started at the beginning when he separated light from darkness. So that's a very good point, Timothy. Anybody like to follow up on that? All silent? Mike?
I was just gonna make a real quick.
Okay, go, Timothy and then Mike.
You, in the beginning, you said you can't just read it literally and truly understand it. And that's really, a lot of people read it literally and understand it, like you said, and they're not really wrong, but they're not trying to really, this is better. It's all about concepts and principles and functions and things that are way more than just a literal explanation.
No, I agree.
I'm trying to say.
No, I agree. Let me just say this. Compared to who's a person that studies planets and the sun and all that stuff. What do you
Astronomer.
A what?
Astronomer.
I can't hear. What?
Astronomer.
Astronomer. Thank you. Yes, astronomer. I'm a Neanderthal compared to an astronomer who can give you the details of the sun and what it does and how it works and how these miniature nuclear explosions, they can go into explanation. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's not germane to my life when I go out and sit in the sun on a Sunday morning and praise Hashem for the beautiful day that it is and enjoy the sun rays. It's immaterial, right? So the whole point is you were right. People can read Genesis and gain from it its benefit without knowing all of that. But what I'm saying, as true lovers of Hashem and lovers of Torah, we don't want to limit ourselves to just the perception. We want to get into what I consider the enigma machine of Torah. Like we really want to get in and understand the causality of creation and God himself, because it gives us the ability of connecting at a higher level. So good point. We're going to go Mike and then Karen.
Well, I agree with you on the timeline. That's never really bothered me.
Right.
You're reading about the light, the primordial light, the primordial darkness from the commentary, that both this light and darkness could coexist together before the terrestrial entities were created. And then God withdrew the primordial light, and we'll have that back in the world to come. Evidently, from the commentary, Adam was able to see that light for a time. So he knew what that was, but we don't have any clue what the light and the darkness was. We know the sun and the moon, but we don't know the light and the darkness. So it's just, I just enjoyed reading that, knowing that one day, God willing, we'll see that.
Right, that's good. And also we remember, and I'm not sure that I communicated it that well, but the sun and the moon and the stars are given to us as a physical image of what the spiritual reality is. So if we really want to understand the time, primordial darkness and light and how it interacts with creation, then look around and look at illumination, look at light in the physical world. That's the most beautiful thing about creation. Creation, remember this, creation was the top-down education of the human. Sinai was the bottom-up. Do you get it? So God created creation to communicate to the world, and then he gives the Torah to give us the ability to connect from the bottom up. It's an incredible idea. Good input, Mike. Karen, or whoever's on the other end.
It's Karen today.
Okay.
Well, I wondered why we had to read the Torah portions over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting to me because when you first start reading it, you just like, you read it and you accept it. And you don't ask that many questions. And every year as we go through, we ask deeper and deeper questions. And it's like, if you engage in this, you're going to, you can't help it. You just become more and more connected, looking for the deeper meaning in it. And I find it really interesting because the kids don't seem to be paying attention sometimes, but then, you know, you hear these things pop out in their Torah concepts, and they're like, wait a second, this is wrong because, and it's the Torah concept that they don't even realize they have absorbed, and they're living it. So it's really cool. And there's so much packed in every verse, and like there's passages that I have no idea why we need to know them. It looks like it's saying the same thing over and over again, but someday I'm going to ask the right questions and I'm going to start to understand those passages.
Well, God willing, you'll be in a group like this so that we can all hear you ask the question that we've all wanted to know the same information. It's very true. Very true. Mary?
Yeah, one of the things, what you just said, is that from the beginning, from Genesis, it's from the top down, and at Sinai, from down up. You know, we're learning. I think there's an awful lot in that area. I mean, that's a new concept. We need a teaching just on that.
I totally agree with you. And that's why this year, as I've been sort of contemplating and praying about my approach to the Torah portion this year, because I was convinced aptly by some of our students on Wednesday or whatever day it was, Thursday, that we should continue on doing the Parsha, was that I want to bring out knowledge that not only just gives us the historicity of the text and the simple meaning, but also that which helps to change us, that helps to illuminate our lives, to help us have a better understanding of our Creator and our relationship with other people, and ultimately to read the Torah in such a way that we gain this insightful wisdom that otherwise, if we just do a cursory reading of the text, we're going to miss. And I'm asking you guys, as we go along and we study this year, dig into those things that will help each other and our connection with God and growth. I love the fact that our sages, and obviously Moshe Rabbeinu, did not mince any words when it comes to pointing out the disparity sometimes of the godly souls that existed before us, because it helps us to realize we're just as capable of making failures and successes as they are. And that's an incredible thing. So you're right, Mary Lou. It's this whole idea. I think from here on out, my focus is going to be this idea of what do we get from top down and what are we getting from bottom up. Whole nother level of understanding. For example, you know, they tell the B'nai Noach that, you know, you really don't need to be concerned with all the elements of the Torah law and halakha, in which I agree, it's not an issue. But the knowledge that is squeezed out of text and understanding of the bottom up will also help fill in the blank on what God gave us from the top down. It's hopefully, God willing, we'll get it this year. So we'll see. Karen, do you still have your hand up, or you just forgot to let it down?
Just forgot to put it down. Sorry.
Okay. Who else? Anybody else? Well, I appreciate your attentiveness. And Thursday, we're going to pick this back up in Bereshit. I've never done it this way. And unfortunately, I might have to take it into the next parsha. I don't know. I'm trying not to. It's so easy to get bogged down in this text because there's just too much. There's too much here. I'm reminded of, and we're all reminded, you know, we watch the History Channel. I'm a big history buff. And you'll watch something on some event in the past, and they break down and they bring the documents and they have explanation and archaeology, and you look at it and you go, well, holy smoke, I had no idea that this was so complicated and so interlocking with so many different human beings and people in the world. And that is the Torah itself. The Torah is the exact same way. Karen, did you raise your hand up? Was that an accident? Or are you just wanting attention? Gabrielle, go for it.
No, for me, I'm absolutely fascinated with this first chapter. And I think it's just because, when we start delving into time, I really liked what you had to say about perception, because I see that in perception. And just an excellent example is like one of the tests you do for field sobriety for someone who's on like a stimulant like methamphetamine is you actually give them a Romberg test. And what it does is it determines how fast they perceive 30 seconds moving forward in time. And when I've done it before, usually only 1 or 2 seconds for them is 30 seconds.
Really? That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And so for when it comes to perception and things of that nature, you look at this and you understand it. You try to understand it. You're like, you know what? Trying to understand perception, our perception of time is completely different. But one of the things that I find very fascinating about this that we're just covering the first couple of days is when I look at Shabbat and just, that how even different, how it's respected. If you look at Christianity, when it divorces itself from, it says we are a separate religion with Charlemagne. They go and they immediately divorce themselves from Shabbat. And then when you have even Islam says, they haven't stated it belongs to the Jews in the Quran, which I found fascinating. I found that out earlier this week. And
They said it did belong to the Jews?
if I'm not mistaken, there was a quote that basically said it belongs to the Jews and they celebrate Friday because it celebrates the celebration of Adam, the creation of Adam.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
But anyways, just looking into that and just thinking about the fact that it feels like we're given a little gift of just kind of like when you have a father who gives a son who's very interested in, my son, if he's interested in what I do, I'm not going to give him an adult task, but I'll give him something to copy so that he feels like he's part of it, whether it's a toy tool set or something like that.
Right.
And I was just, for me, it's kind of looking at the Shabbat as the gift, saying, this is me, this emulates me. And even when you look at the blessings for Shabbat, it's about, we acknowledge that the Creator rested. It's our way of saying we acknowledge you, and this is what you did. And it's just a beautiful thing. But just looking at what you're talking about with light and time, and just the way that things were created. I think I was listening to a video from, I think it was Sammy Cohen. No, Zamir Cohen.
Samir Cohen.
Yeah, and he was just talking about how it was a Hebrew lecture, and so I had to read it in subtitles. And I'm just glad that God has enabled me to read subtitles fast.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was just interesting talking about, yeah.
If you've not gotten this book, a great companion to have in your home. It's by Rabbi Zamir Cohen. Go ahead.
But just basically understanding that, not getting locked into what we see in the text, but trying to understand and build our knowledge through, and just realizing that stuff like the Big Bang Theory actually is supported, and whether people who are supporting it for atheism even realize it, that they're actually supporting proof that actually leads us closer to God, not away from God.
Correct. That is spot on, man. I really appreciate you bringing that up, because it is amazing that we can get caught up so much in the physical world. I mentioned this the other day about one-dimensional human beings that live in just a single dimensional world, and their world is devoid of any perception of self-improvement, any perception of spiritual elevation, any perception that there is some need to maybe connect to the divine. And there are more of those people around than we actually probably recognize. And I believe that we would be remiss if we don't recognize the fact that the only thing that can bring you beyond that is connecting to the higher divine level. From Karen, okay, thank you, Malachi. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Nancy. You guys be well. Karen, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Malachi, I just wanted to tell you how much he liked class.
Tell Malachi I really appreciate and respect him. Growing up to be a fine young man.
Will do.
Okay,
Thank
tell him I
you.
still need my grass cut. Never mind, I'm just picking. Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, if we want to wait till Thursday, that'll be fine to talk about this. But I was reading Isaiah 46:9, and you referenced it, I think, earlier. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. And what he said when he said, remember the former things, the ancient days, he's referring back to the days of creation. And then he goes on to verse 10, declaring from the beginning, the end, and from ancient times, things that are not yet done. So when he's saying declaring from ancient times, declaring the beginning, declaring from the beginning, the end from ancient times, when we go back to the very first words, in the beginning, or we find in the end of everything in the beginning right there. And if we are, does that mean we're going to go back to the way this is, the earth and everything is described here?
That's exactly what you're talking about. Because we talk about the period after this period that we don't even know what it is at the end of age, at what is it, the world to come. That we return to Gan Eden, whatever that is, but it's a heightened level of spiritual, a spiritual existence. We everything around us is a what's the word for it? Is everything around us in the physical world is, gosh, what would be the word for it? It's like the perception that God gave us, but the reality, what's real, exists above that. Does that make sense, Sandy? I don't
An
know.
illusion? You're talking about an illusion?
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
You know,
you reminded me in our Hebrew class Wednesday, Richard was saying that we were talking about Melchizedek,
right.
and he was called King of Salem. And then I forget the next time he said the name, it's referring to Jerusalem, but it was called something else. And then David called it Jerusalem,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
means two Jerusalems. There's a Jerusalem on the earth and there's a Jerusalem in the heavens. So is that kind of what you're talking about? What we're
Yes.
looking at here is like the earthly Jerusalem, but this is actually duplicated in the heavenly Jerusalem. And
Right.
that's where we'll go back to the
Right.
beginning.
Right. So at some point, I would think that the two worlds seemed like that at the millennial period during the rule of Mashiach, that there is sort of the kissing of the heaven and the earth. It's talked about the temple coming down. You understand the building of the temple. You know, we have this confusion. Well, is God going to bring a temple down, or do we build a temple? All that's immaterial to me because we'll all figure it out when we need to figure it out. But the point is, yes, there is going to be this time in which the world ends up returning back to Gan Eden. So the beginning is the creation story itself is going to is telling us that there will be a return to that. Because you remember it says it without form and void, meaning that the world that existed prior to that was left void. It was wrecked. It was gone. So then creation was started anew, et cetera, et cetera. So who knows? You know, there's this whole philosophical thing that goes around in discussion. Are there many other creations besides this one that exist parallel to ours? Who knows? Harvey, go ahead.
Hi, I was just going to say, you mentioned you were a history buff, and I thought FYI be interesting. We talked about morality and the Torahitic guidance for all these things. And so I was invited to go to Los Angeles to Hollywood to do a History Channel show about a year ago, talking about strange human phenomena. And I took it all the way back to the 4th chapter of the book of Daniel, where we really have a basis for the whole idea of a werewolf. In medical language, it's called lycanthropy. So if you're interested, and that's using biblical sources. And if you're interested, that's called The Unexplained with, Captain Kirk from Star Trek, William Shatner, he's the MC. And it'd be season 1, number 15. And then they called me back and I flew back to Hollywood because they want to talk, they talk about morality and that sort of thing. So they wanted me to talk about the dynamics of the greatest swindlers or imposters in the 20th century. So I did another one from the Unexplained from the History Channel, season 2. I think it was number 6, but it's the greatest imposters of the 20th century. And how does that relate to morality? And how does that relate to our ethical guidance and so on? And is there good that can come out of that? That's the question I raised. You're on mute, so I can't hear you.
It's called The Unexplained, and it's on the History Channel.
Yeah, there are 2 seasons, season 1 and season 2, called The Unexplained with William Shatner.
Okay.
And season 1, going way back to the book of Daniel and Unusual Human Phenomena, and showing a basis for werewolves. And then in season 2, I did, I think it was the 6th edition of season 2, where we're talking about the greatest swindlers and imposters of the 20th century.
I most definitely want to watch that. As a matter of fact, I would be interested, and I've been thinking about this, and maybe one day I can just have a conversation. I actually wanted to maybe do one where we record it, but I would be interested to get your perspective on where we're at as a society, not just talking about American, but in general, world society. How are we now in the area of ethics and morality, and how we treat our fellow compared to what it was 150 years ago, 200, 300? That'd be an interesting perspective, because in many of our minds, the world's going to hell in a handbasket and everything's horrible. But then when I go back and do some research on slavery, realizing that 3 million plus Africans were brought into Brazil for slavery. Out of our, we only come to like 300 and something thousand slaves. Like, I had no idea the perspective. Cruelty it's a horrible thing, but does it still exist? That would be an interesting conversation I'd like to have with you, especially from your field. I would be interested in talking to you about maybe a Torah perspective from your field of psychology. That would be
Psychiatry.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, psychiatry. I'm sorry. But you understand, it would be really interesting to know the perspective and see it. Maybe that's a class you can do us for some time.
Well, we'll see in the future.
In the future.
All right.
In the future. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
You've got enough work as it is, right?
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, guys, it's been great. We'll see you tonight at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time for our Torah discussion and a little Tehillim. So we'll talk to you later. Shalom, shalom.